Welcome to the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn. I am R. Adam Smith, creator of this audiocast series. As an entrepreneur, investor, founder, investment banker, and board leader the last 25 years, I'm fortunate for my many experiences within the family firm industry. A warm thank you to our live audience on LinkedIn today and for those listening in the future. A brief comment on why I created this broadcast. Private companies are a passion of mine, having grown up in a family of entrepreneurs and having engaged for 2 decades in deals, strategic transformations, investments, and boards with an array of fascinating family enterprises, family firms, and family offices. I founded this series to offer a useful platform for listeners to hear from veterans, academics, and leaders in the vast family firm ecosystem. Whether you're a family business owner, building, running, or advising a family office, or just expanding your family office activities, I hope these conversations are useful and enlightening. And now it's time to turn our attention to our accomplished guests on today's episode.
Hi, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm happy to have you finally on the show. I'm going to talk a bit about you briefly, and then we'll dig in, okay?
Sounds great.
Karen McNeill, PhD and CAP designation, is an expert in family wealth advising with a unique background in history, culture, and philanthropy. She earned her PhD in history from UC Berkeley, specializing there in women in philanthropy, and she then pivoted into family wealth about a decade ago. Since then, she works with multi-generational families and their advisors to offer flourishing across generations, and in the process, weaving story, history, and culture into their shared family learning. Her approach highlights how traditions, values, and narratives can strengthen inclusion, empowerment, and joy in their business. Karen also advances certifications, including the Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy, also training in different engaged ownership certifications and Real Colors, Values Edge. She is also a Dean of Family Stories, History, and Culture at the PPA, the Purposeful Planning Institute, and she sits on various boards and nonprofits as well. She's the founder of Verdandi and Associates, which is her practice inspired by the Norse myth of the Norns, representing, of course, past, present, and future, which is an allegory to the multi-generational family dynamics that we'll talk about today. She also shares thought leadership via publications and presentations and podcasts. Okay, so maybe we start on family stories. Obviously, stories, whether it's in writing or it's more ephemeral or more around legacy, is a strategic asset for the families and also any advisors that are trying to work with the family on next gen or succession planning and legacy. Can you talk a bit about kind of what family stories mean to you and how those narratives and traditions can unify multi-generational families and why storytelling is very powerful for the community?
Yeah. So humans, we have a natural tendency to tell stories all the time. And narrative it's a principal way that we form our identity and the way we navigate the world, our individual identity, our collective identity. And so just with a little bit of intention, we as advising teams working with families, we can take this unique asset, and you will find that I'm a real stickler for words. So when I say unique, it's like a thumbprint. Themes may be similar across different families, but the details of the family stories are unique. So we can take that unique asset and transform it into one of the most flexible and inclusive tools for working with individuals and families across a whole host of themes and issues and possibilities. So this can happen, in the discovery process for advisors. It's a common thing when new clients on board that they'll be presented with a questionnaire, and you fill up. I've looked at a lot of these things. They're filled out sometimes well and sometimes not. But imagine adding something to your practice that's like a discovery interview with the principals of the family, and how that makes maybe there's a principal decision maker, and maybe that person's spouse who isn't the principal decision maker, but we know is going to be really, really important to this relationship. Well, we ask them individually to share their stories, and the both of them feel seen and heard. So immediately you create a different rapport. They're not writing things down. They're not confecting things. It's a natural process. And then we can take away from that conversation amazing insights into red flags, maybe, but opportunities, learning opportunities, ideas about, the educational um, topics that are going to be top of mind, the personality nuances, ways that we can create memorable moments just by inviting our new clients to have these interviews during a discovery period. So that's one thing for the advisors. And then for families, common a common theme or themes that come with families are: how do we integrate the rising gen? How do we integrate new family members in a smooth way? And storytelling, we can invite these people to the family meetings or part of the family meetings and have facilitated storytelling activities where they have legitimate stories because they are their stories. So they have participated in the activity. Again, like everybody, it doesn't matter if you're married, if you're not married, whatever your gender is, if you've married in, if you have money, if you don't, all of these stories become phenomenal warmers for the family meeting. And then we can also, do the debrief and the takeaways and use that to help us guide our conversations. So I mean, that's just like the tip of the iceberg of ways that these stories can be so powerful to families. And I mean, if you kept me talking, I have no I have unlimited ideas about how this can be so powerful.
Good. And so just talk briefly about the tactical. So what you just said was quite interesting in terms of the process of documenting the stories. And I'd love you to talk about the approach and the best practices for documenting these stories in terms of analog versus digital. So how do you recommend to document and gather all this information in terms of written materials versus just putting them in ChatGPT, AI, and iCloud? And then once your families have the stories and documentation, if you could talk about how that documentation evolves over years and decades through the family office charter or just ongoing committees and meetings and family the evolution of family values over time.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple of key words that you stated there. Once a family has documented and collected the information, what do they do? And then the evolve over decades. And this is really important because you have the beginning period. Let's say a family wants to be super intentional, and they really want to take the stuff from the past, be it genealogical research, or they have a cache of family archival stuff, could be letters and pictures and all of that kind of stuff. Say they want to digitize that and they want to go through that. And maybe they want to incorporate that into a family film, some legacy project, or a book, or whatever it may be. There's so many fabulous options out there. What's important to understand is that the family history doesn't end with that, right? That's that moment in time's understanding, like shared um, narrative, the most meaningful narrative that family has adopted as the one that's going to guide them for the next 10, 20, 30 years. But it doesn't change. The emotional resonance of any narrative, it's going to decline over the years from one generation to the next. And to support that family continuity and family coherence, we really want to make sure that returning to the family narrative and returning to the family stories is integrated into the governing process, so that so new voices are included, updated values are included, and we're modernizing with the times. It's important to curate the family archive, to go through that analog material and to digitize a good chunk of it. Not even the stuff that is like most meaningful to you in that moment, but beyond that, because it might resonate. Some of the stuff that doesn't resonate now might resonate later. And to digitize that. Um, it's not a bad idea to retain the hard copies of that old archive, because there is that feeling of holding on to something somebody wrote, feeling it, seeing the scale of it, and things like that. It can become cumbersome. A family might want to look into donating that physical archive to an institution that has the space and the trained experts who really hold on to that material. And then the digital space is interesting. I think that in terms of, chat GPT and AI, these are baby days. These are really, really baby days. A curated family chat GPT space may be useful and interesting. I'm not overly familiar yet. People they're trying to help me like be better with chat GPT or AI. But I do love some more interactive, intuitively interactive digital spaces. Like one that I love is called Enwoven. There's another one by Joy Media called Grio. And these ones, they have a visual component, they have an AI component, they can they can map where things are happening in your family over time. They have interactive comments about them. So they're more we want the family members to be engaged, right? My big thing is we are historical actors. So we want to be engaged rather than passive recipients. And so it's important to have that interactive kind of digital repository that people can go back to. As part of the governance, important. One thing that's interesting to me in this space is I think whatever topic we're thinking about, whether it's investments, philanthropy, the trust and estate planning, um, education, all of these things, anything a family wants to do together, that it's super important to understand a shared sense of values and culture and identity. Like everybody needs to be on board the same ship, right? And so we can take families through something, a values exercise. I love Values Edge. We can take them through those exercises, but it's always struck me as a little bit strange to have these exercises that are based on the motivational values from the past 3 to 6 months of your life as the basis for thinking about the next 5, 10 generation of decisions. And so to integrate, looking back at the family stories and the history to understand the family culture over time, what transcends time beyond those 3, 6 months, and get that muscle memory of long-term thinking, that's also very valuable for these assets that the family has. But they need to be accessible.
We're not underwriting the podcast by Iron Mountain, but I do recommend to have paper storage, and Iron Mountain's a good company. And then on the digital side, Trusted Family is a good company. I know some of the founders. It's a good digital platform. Shifting to the intersection of culture, talk about some of your research into philanthropy and like corporate environment, and how the corporate environment actually shapes the stewardship of wealth over time. And that kind of leads us into next gen as well. So like there's the traditional values of like wealth and what wealth means, like power, influence, scale, et cetera. But then the modern version of wealth is like more broader, to softer power. You want to talk
Yeah.
about that?
So my whole foray into this world began with my scholarship, which is on this architect named Julia Morgan, who's most famous for designing Hearst Castle, the elaborate hilltop estate on the central coast of William Randolph Hearst, and the inspiration for Xanadu in Citizen Kane. And very quickly, my work became about the clientele, which was really it's the wives, the mothers, the sisters of the business, political, cultural leaders of California in particular at the time, and just really brought home how powerful women have been in the philanthropic space for like 200 years now. And how, in this case, they were building institutions, cultural, educational, art, all sorts of institutions, physically buildings, but also then the institutions. And certain themes come out about how important collaboration is among women, and how community impact is among women, and how education is so important to women before they're making financial decisions, and how combining the serious side of having an impact with fun, be it hosting parties, balls, plays, whatever, to raise money, is so. That was my first foray into philanthropy. And again, just realizing just how important women have been to developing the whole philanthropic and charitable landscape is impressive. And then how germane that is to today, as women in particular come into more and more money and decision making power, and how we're seeing those themes play out in that process. How women are, time and again, surveys will show that women are very interested in philanthropy and impact investing, how women enjoy collaborative decision making, how women want education before making decisions, so they make educated risks, how they like to combine fun with their decision making around money. So that's one major theme in my work around philanthropy and how I came into it.
Yeah, there's been a dramatic expansion of philanthropy within the family office, of course, and the women's side, like we see the modern day Oprah Winfrey's, of course, and Melinda Gates. But then there's kind of the Angelina Jolie type philanthropist, and then going back, there's Eleanor Roosevelt, and then like Catherine Graham and Doris Duke along the way. You want to tell a story of a woman philanthropist while we're on the topic?
Oh, well, the one I know best is Phoebe Hearst. So that's William Randolph Hearst's mother. And this is a good story to take, because one thing that I think it's really important to keep in mind is that when we're talking about women and wealth, and we're talking about impact and philanthropy, there may be some notion that women aren't also very interested in seeing an ROI, a traditional kind of ROI in their investments as well. So Phoebe Hearst, when her husband died back in 1891, she inherited everything. It is the shortest will I have ever read, and her husband just gave her everything and gave nothing to William. And so let's say that was 21 million, which was a lot of money at the time. So over the course of the next 3 decades, Phoebe Hearst, she funded women's education in academia. She basically was almost single-handedly responsible for catapulting the University of California to national and international prestige. She founded like PETA. I mean, she was so deeply involved with so many philanthropic ventures. She's been compared to Carnegie on the female side. So deeply engaged in philanthropy. She um, she spent something like over half of her wealth, invested half of her wealth into philanthropy. based on that 1891 number. And when she died, she had more than $21 million to her name that William Randolph Hearst then inherited. And so she was at the same time that she was investing in local communities, in the state, in the nation, across the country. She was also very wisely investing in various business ventures. And of course, she would have had tons of mining ventures and all sorts of things. So that's a woman whose life was profoundly impactful in the philanthropic world and super mindful of more traditional investments too. So I love Phoebe.
We have another 10 minutes. Let's move into the philanthropy bridging generations and using it as an anchor for next gen, for G1 moving to G2, going through all the Gs to embrace philanthropy. And philanthropy is so huge now, but it's actually not really big enough for what society needs. It's actually been having a tough time since COVID. And I think the US is certainly the largest philanthropic market, but I don't think our government and taxes and the post ESG movement's also creating a problem for philanthropy. So it's important to really, if you could just talk about what philanthropy means to you as an intergenerational connector. And before you start that, I just was doing some math that for people that are interested in $21 million, let's say back in 1951 or so, I think, if you compounded that for 10% over 74 years, it'd be $24 billion.
Yeah, it was huge.
So it gets to be a big number. Anyway, back to my comment on philanthropy.
Sure, absolutely. This is a big topic, and you're absolutely right. So the first thing I'll say is that I have found that the rising gen, and in that case, I'm talking about millennials and Gen Z, is that they're pretty philanthropy agnostic. Like it could be what we might classify as traditional philanthropy with a nonprofit, with a foundation, a 501(c)(3) or whatever, but it could be impact investing. It could be microfinancing. It's more about social responsibility and stewardship and giving back and having an impact, a positive impact, an intentional impact during your lifetime. So I have found them to be pretty agnostic. So it's a pretty big and growing umbrella, that idea of philanthropy. So that's one thing I would say. Another thing I would say is that a lot of times I've worked with families in initial conversations who think that philanthropy is going to be the way that the family stays together because it's doing good, right? It's the feel good part of our family, but that's not really necessarily the reason why a family, or the best approach or mindset that a family might have in going into philanthropy together. Because if you think about two or three generations coming into a room together, whether it's 4 people or 20 people or more, you're going to have 4 personalities or 20 personalities, and there are going to be some overlapping values, and there are going to be some diametrically opposed viewpoints on the world. You have this group of individuals. So if shared philanthropy is one of the goals of, say, the leading generation, or maybe it's one of the goals that's presented by a younger generation, a rising gen, then how do we go about shared philanthropy in a way that is actually going to create coherence and commonality and be something that works well for the whole group? And so that's where, again, the storytelling and the family history can be such an important asset, because you can plumb the depths of the past and find shared causes. I was working with one family where there was a rift between the brother and the sister, and the sister actually proposed the family history project. She wasn't very interested, but she knew her brother was. I was working with her brother, who was like the family historian, and they all knew about certain generations of mental health issues in the family. But when I presented to him 2 more generations of mental health issues, then all of a sudden this transcended time. there's this like forgiveness of more recent generations, understanding that this is a theme that goes way, way back. And now this theme is something that can rise above the tensions that are in the room and be that North Star, that common goal that they all share. Like, oh, we see a common need, regardless of where we're coming from, around mental health, and we can invest in that. And so it becomes a part of the family's philanthropic landscape, but one that everybody can gather around. And then there are other great things that, it can be a safe way to engage the rising gen in some financial education, expose them to the way that nonprofits work, which gets them into governance in a different way. So it can be very, very flexible. Also, like, going out and volunteering together, the different ways of helping rising gen understand what philanthropy means. Time, treasure, talent, and all
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm.
those are those.
And
Yeah.
and how much bigger should philanthropy be, do you think, let's say in America? Like, do you feel like it should be much bigger? And if so, like how can that happen?
Oh my goodness. That
Mm-hmm.
that's a big question. I would love to see it bigger. I think that philanthropy has a bit of a narrative issue itself right now with you know, some public perception of funds getting stuck in a DAF, which may or may not be true, or a foundation existing as a tax efficiency vehicle rather than a way to fund things. So there's that level of shifting the narrative that I think needs to happen. I think we as advising teams can work with families to really think about how your um, financial decision making landscape, the whole of it can align with your values, and maybe philanthropy and things related to it in that growing umbrella can align with that. I think we can share stories about how important philanthropy has been to the developing country. It's always been a third part of the economy. So there's a lot of narrative work we could do.
Do you think has more upside scale wise on the corporate side or the individual side in the U.S.? Like what's lagging? If you were to think, okay, how do we create a much bigger philanthropic society? Would it be more on the individual side or the corporate side?
That's a good question. I can't say for honestly. I don't. I don't know. I can't answer that one.
Yeah, they're both big actually. Just looking at some stats. So flourishing, I mean, philanthropy can be flourishing, but let's say you want to create a lot of wealth to be flourishing. You want that wealth to grow and then to trickle down through the family, through the community, through the company. That's when I talk about legacy. I usually offer a lens that legacy is like what you make it, and the continuity and the continuity and the like the survival of the company itself, and the wealth from the company. So legacy doesn't have to stop when you sell the company
Right.
as a family office or family business, because that wealth lives on. Can you sort of like talk about the concept of flourishing and what that means in terms of your tools and frameworks, and sort of how you communicate that message and that terminology of flourishing?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right, and I would just add to your idea of legacy is that legacy is something that exists whether we want it to or not. We all live lives and leave an imprint on the world, and we can do that passively or we can do it actively and intentionally. And so working with our families, I think there's just a huge opportunity to work with legacy intentionally. So that's one thing I would say. And then the flourishing really comes from this balance of honoring the individual and the collective. It could be honoring the employees and the company. But it's finding that balance. And so when it comes back to my expertise in this, stories and history and narrative and culture, it's really important to keep sharing the stories, to keep exploring the stories, to keep collecting and going back to them, because i- if you can see yourself in that narrative and you can integrate that into your identity, and then it helps to ground you and you want to be a part of sustaining it, right? And so you develop that intrinsic motivation that helps you like want to be a part of the decision making about what we're going to do with this wealth, how we're going to steward it, how we're going to be with each other. Um, and it can be a real motivating factor. So yeah, that flourishing is really having a strong sense of who I am alone, who I am in relationship to the family, to the company that is or was, and to the wealth, having my values, my sense of self aligned with that, and being able to make decisions that feel like an integrated whole to govern that narrative in a way that feels coherent. And then, the flourishing, that sense of joy and contentment and happiness, and maybe togetherness, it follows.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. I think it's really great how you talk on the softer side of the wealth, because that's harder to get to in today's society. And we've had some guests on the podcast, as you may know: Chelsea Toller, Emily Bouchard, Valerie Golinskaya, Christina Wing, Valerie Bross. These women have been very in our podcast. I really enjoyed their point of view in terms of women leadership, but also in terms of the softer side. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss in terms of the family office ecosystem today that you think is important for everyone to keep in mind, thinking about, flourishing as an organization? That would be interesting.
Perhaps I'm biased, but I would say that the narrative and the stories are an under-tapped, underutilized resource that family offices have. And uh, not infrequently, I will hear, "Oh, I'm so tired of the family story." And that could be a sign, or the business story, or, the dominant story that's the culture of the organization. That may be a sign that it's time to revisit it, unpack what we know and all the stuff we don't know, and to find a new way of telling the story, so that the people who are in the organization now, be it family or company, see themselves in it and want to be a part of it. And things will, again, they'll flow better from there. So I do think that there's a lot of like kind of like understanding that it is important, and yet not quite tapping into it. So I'd just say tap into it.
Karen, that was really wonderful, and it's great to have you on today on our 52nd episode, I believe. I'm glad we finally connected, and really enjoyed your thoughtfulness today and learning from you.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. It's been a pleasure to be here. And thank you for your thoughtful questions.
You're welcome. No, it's fun. We'll be in touch for sure, no doubt. And you're joining a wonderful cast of conversationalists here. I'd like to thank you and also our Family Business Audiocast attendees today, and our esteemed guest, of course, Karen McNeill. This is Artem Smith signing off. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn.